The first time my son looked at me like a stranger, it was in a glass-walled attorney's office in downtown Los Angeles. His jaw was tight. His voice was colder than the marble floor. "Don't expect a dime from Dad's 92 million, he said. And in that moment, I understood, I had already been buried. I'm 81. My hands shake when I lift a teacup. People assume that means my mind does too. They see the wrinkles, the slow steps, the silence, and they mistake it for surrender. They didn't see the woman who helped build an empire from a one-bedroom apartment in San Jose. They didn't see the nights I stitched business contracts together, while my husband slept, or the years I smiled through betrayal, because silence was cheaper than divorce. And they definitely didn't see what silence was becoming. The lawyer cleared his throat, sliding papers across the table like a priest offering last rites. My husband's will. Amended. Final. Every page smelled like ink and arrogance. My son wouldn't look at me. He stared at the city instead, at buildings his father's money helped raise. "You'll be taken care of," he said, rehearsed bored. "There's a small trust. For living expenses." Living, as if I had already stopped. I signed nothing, I said nothing. Silence has always been my sharpest blade. At home the house echoed. Not because it was empty, but because everything in it remembered me. The piano I paid for when my husband said music was a waste. The paintings I chose when he wanted blank walls. I touched the frames, my fingers trailing over dust and decades. $92 million, built on my back, handed to a man who learned greed before gratitude. That night I didn't cry. I sat at my old desk, the one everyone forgot about, and opened a drawer no one had touched in 40 years. Inside were folders, yellowed, precise, patient. Copies of emails before emails were fashionable. Handwritten agreements. Dates. Quiet little truths. My husband always said, "You remember too much." He was right. I remembered everything. Days passed. Then weeks. My son didn't call. Neither did my husband. The world assumed I was fading gently, like old women are supposed to. Instead, I began making appointments. I met a forensic accountant in Palo Alto who didn't underestimate white hair. A woman with sharp eyes and sharper loyalty. Because I once paid for her mother's chemotherapy when no one else would. She read the documents slowly, then looked up at me like she was seeing a ghost stand up from its grave. "This changes things," she whispered. I smiled for the first time in months. Then came the quiet phone calls. Former partners my husband had crushed. A board member pushed out after asking too many questions. A secretary who'd signed documents she never read and never forgot. People are loyal to power, but they are faithful to memory. At the next family gathering, my husband's birthday, all champagne and fake laughter, my son kissed my cheek like it was an obligation. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, already turning away. I watched him, tall, confident, wearing a watch I bought before he learned how to say thank you. "I'm fine," I said softly, and meant something very different. Across the room, my husband raised a glass, the king in his castle, unaware that the walls were already cracking. He caught my eye for half a second, dismissive, amused. He thought I was done. He thought the story had already ended. But I had just begun turning the page. I went back to my chair, folded my hands in my lap, and listened to the room buzz with lies and celebration, while, deep in my purse, a single flash drive rested against my palm like a heartbeat. Cold, patient, waiting. The flash drive stayed hidden while the party swelled around me. Lauder bounced off crystal glasses. My husband's associates praised his brilliance, his vision, his self-made genius. Each compliment slid past me like rain on stone. I excused myself early. No one noticed. Back home, I locked the door and sat in the dark, letting the quiet speak. I plugged the flash drive into my old laptop, the one my son once mocked as ancient. The screen flickered to life, and there it was, decades of truth. Neatly labeled, calm as a confession. Shell companies routed through Nevada. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Silent partners erased from records. Money laundered so clean it looked holy. And then, the dagger, my signature, forged. Over and over again. My husband had always joked, "What's yours is mine." He just never expected me to prove it in court. I slept better than I had in years. The next morning, I put on my best coat, and took the train to San Francisco. No assistants. No drivers. Just me and the city that once knew my footsteps when I still ran. The law firm overlooked the bay, glass everywhere. Transparency ironic. The senior partner, Mr. Hargreave, recognized my name before he recognized my face. His smile froze when he finally looked up. "You're supposed to be retired," he said carefully. "I've been resting," I replied. "Not retiring." I laid the documents out one by one. He didn't interrupt. Men like him know when to listen. By the time I finished, his hands were flat on the table, knuckles pale. "This will destroy him," he said. I met his eyes. "No. This will reveal him." There's a difference. Weeks passed again. Quiet weeks. Strategic weeks. Subpoenas don't announce themselves with trumpets, they arrive like shadows. My husband was served during a board meeting. I heard later he laughed it off, called it a misunderstanding. My son called that night. His voice was sharp, annoyed. "Did you do this?" he demanded. I held the phone away from my ear for a second, then brought it back. "Do what, darling?" "Dad's lawyers are freaking out. They say old records are being dragged up. From before I was even born." I smiled into the receiver. "Then they must be very old indeed." "You're being difficult," he snapped. "This isn't your world anymore." I let the silence stretch. Silence makes people nervous. "Everything you have," I said finally, "was born in my world." He hung up. "Good?" The media caught the scent soon after. Not the mainstream outlets, those were still loyal to money, but the smaller ones, hungry and fearless. An investigative journalist reached out, young, relentless. She reminded me of myself before compromise learned my name. I invited her for tea. She expected a frail woman. She got someone who slid a folder across the table and said, "You'll want to verify every page." Her hands trembled as she flipped through it. "Why give this to me?" "Because," I said, stirring my tea, "truth deserves witnesses." By the time the first article dropped, my husband was no longer laughing. His face appeared on television screens, pale tight. Words like alleged, historic fraud, and ongoing investigation wrapped around his name like barbed wire. My son came to see me then, unannounced, furious. He stood in my living room, pacing like a trapped animal. "You're humiliating us," he said. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to my reputation?" I looked up at him from my chair. Slowly, deliberately. "You mean the reputation built on stolen money?" His face twisted. "Dad earned everything he has." I reached into a drawer and placed a single document on the table between us. An original partnership agreement. My handwriting. Another man's name crossed out later illegally. "He didn't," I said quietly. "But you might have if you'd ever asked how?" For the first time, doubt flickered across his eyes. Just for a second. Then pride rushed back in to drown it. "You're bitter?" he said. "Old. You're doing this because you were left out." I nodded. "That's what I hoped you'd think." He left without another word. Court dates were scheduled. Assets were frozen. Former allies vanished. My husband stopped sleeping. I knew because he started calling, late at night, voice hoarse, unfamiliar. "You're enjoying this?" he accused. "No," I said. "I'm enduring it, like I endured you." He threatened me then. Lawyers, countersuits. He reminded me of my age, my fragility, my mortality. I listened patiently. When he finished, I said, "Check the Swiss account ending in 44. The line went dead. What he found there was proof of tax evasion so clean, it could only have come from someone who knew his habits better than he knew himself. Me. The slow burn had become a controlled fire, not wild, not reckless. Every move timed, every reveal measured. I wasn't trying to destroy him all at once. I wanted him awake for it. As the city buzzed with scandal and speculation, I returned to my piano. I played every evening, fingers stiff but certain. The same piece I used to practice when my son was small, before ambition taught him how to look past me. Outside, sirens wailed. Somewhere downtown, my husband's empire was shrinking room by room, account by account. Inside, I played on. The piano became my metronome. Each note marked time toward collapse. By the third week, my husband's name was no longer spoken with admiration. It was spoken cautiously, like a disease you didn't want to catch. The board suspended him, temporarily. Banks stopped returning calls. Friends crossed streets to avoid cameras and him. He showed up at my door one evening, unannounced. Unrecognizable. The man who once filled rooms with confidence now stood hunched, his coat wrinkled, his eyes darting like prey. I didn't invite him in, I didn't have to. This house had always been mine in spirit, if not on paper. You planned this, he said, voice low cracked. I tilted my head. I survived this? He laughed bitterly. You think you've won? I stepped aside and let him enter. The living room smelled of lemon polish and old books. Familiar, unsafe. I think, I said, walking slowly to my chair, that you've finally met consequences. He slammed his fist on the table. You were nothing without me. I looked at him then, really looked. The lines in his face, the fear he could no longer hide. And yet, I said, you stole my name to sign your lies. His breath caught. That was the wound that never healed. The knowledge that I had always been smarter. He leaned closer, voice venomous. Our son will never forgive you. I smiled, small and tired. I didn't do this for forgiveness. He left shortly after, slamming the door hard enough to rattle frames. One fell. The glass cracked. Inside was a photo of us when we were young, before money taught him how to betray. I picked it up, studied it, then placed it face down in a drawer. The next strike came quietly. A federal investigation doesn't roar, it whispers. Agents visited former employees. Accounts were dissected. Every shell he'd hidden behind was peeled back. The empire was bleeding, and the blood trail led back decades. Then the will surfaced again. His lawyers tried to shield it. But wills are public when challenged, and mine was challenged, with precision. A medical evaluation from years ago. A timeline proving undue influence. A signature analysis that screamed forgery. My son watched it all unravel on screens and in court filings, his inheritance evaporating like smoke. He stopped calling. Then, finally, he came back. This time he didn't shout. He stood in the doorway, eyes red, shoulders slumped. The watch was gone. They're saying Dad might go to prison, he said quietly. I poured tea. They're saying many things. He swallowed. Is it true? That he forged your signature. I placed the original document in front of him. The real one. My handwriting steady, unmistakable. You tell me? I said. He stared at it for a long time, too long. The room filled with the sound of his breathing, ragged, uneven. All this time, he whispered, I thought you were just in the way. I closed my eyes for a moment. When I opened them, my voice was calm. You learned that from watching him. Tears finally fell. Not loud. Not dramatic, just quiet, ashamed. I didn't protect you, he said. I chose him. I nodded once. You did? He looked up sharply. Can you stop this? The question hung between us like a loaded gun. I shook my head. No, not cruel. Not angry. Just honest. He left after that, slower than before, carrying the weight of a truth too heavy to put down. The trial began in winter. My husband sat at the defense table, smaller somehow, his confidence reduced to rehearsed smiles and shaking hands. I watched from the gallery. Wrapped in a scarf the color of ash. Witness after witness stood, old partners, accountants, assistants, people who had been silenced with money or fear until now. Then it was my turn. They helped me to the stand. The courtroom hushed. I could feel eyes on my back, waiting for weakness. I gave them none. I spoke clearly, slowly. I told the story as it happened, not as it was sold, the sacrifices, the lies, the thefts disguised as ambition. I spoke of nights spent fixing his mistakes, of warnings ignored, of signatures stolen while I slept. When I finished, the room was silent. My husband wouldn't meet my eyes. The verdict came weeks later. Guilty. On multiple counts. He didn't scream. He didn't faint. He just closed his eyes, as if finally understanding that silence, my silence, had never meant ignorance. The sentencing stripped him of everything he worshipped. Assets seized. Companies dissolved. His name erased from buildings he once carved into stone. And the will. Invalidated. The estate was restructured. The money, what remained, was divided by law, not arrogance. I received control, not because I asked, because it was always mine. On the day the final papers were signed, I returned to the attorney's office, the same glass-walled room where my son once told me not to expect a dime. This time, he sat beside me. Crumbled. The lawyer slid the documents across. Mrs. Hale, he said, respectful now, it's done. I didn't rush to sign. I took my time. Let the moment breathe. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that a king had fallen and an old woman had risen without lifting a sword. I signed. When we stood to leave, my son hesitated. "What will you do now?" I paused at the door. "Rest," I said. "On my terms." Behind us, the office lights reflected off the glass, clear, sharp, unforgiving. The story wasn't finished yet. But the balance had finally shifted. Rest didn't mean retreat. It meant control. The money returned quietly. Not as headlines but as wire transfers, court orders, signatures that no longer needed permission. I didn't celebrate. I audited every account, every asset, every shadow my husband had left behind. Power, I learned long ago, is best handled without witnesses. My son moved through those weeks like a ghost. He showed up when lawyers summoned him, nodded when spoken to, said very little. The arrogance had drained out of him. What remained was confusion, and something closer to fear. One evening he stayed after the attorneys left. The office emptied, leaving just us and the hum of fluorescent lights. "I don't know who I am without him," he said suddenly. I didn't look up from the papers. "Then you were never your own man." He flinched, but didn't argue. Outside, reporters waited. They always did now. They wanted statements. Tears, triumph. I gave them none. Silence still worked better than speeches. Inside I began dismantling what my husband had built, not with fire, but with precision. Companies were restructured, boards replaced. I kept the profitable, ethical pieces and cut away the rot. Some executives resigned in protest. Others begged to stay. I listened. Then decided. At 81 I had no interest in legacy monuments. I wanted impact. I funded investigations into corporate fraud, quietly, anonymously. I endowed scholarships for women who were told to stay small. I reopened lawsuits my husband had buried with money and intimidation. Every check I signed felt like reclaiming a stolen breath. My husband wrote to me from prison. Long letters at first, full of justification and self-pity. He blamed stress, competition. Then none. I never wrote back. My son visited him once. He came back pale, shaken. "He doesn't sound like himself," he said. I folded laundry carefully. That's because he never knew who he was without power. Winter gave way to spring. The city bloomed. So did scrutiny. A journalist published a long-form piece, not about my husband's fall, but about my rise. They called me the quiet architect. They traced my fingerprints through decades of decisions previously credited to a man now in a cell. I didn't correct them. I let the truth stretch its legs. At a charity gala, one I funded but didn't attend, my son overheard donors whispering my name with reverence. Not pity. Respect. He told me about it later, unsure whether to smile or apologize. "I used to think strength was loud," he said. I met his eyes. "It's only loud when it's afraid." He nodded, absorbing it like a lesson too late but still necessary. Then came the final move. One company remained, the crown jewel, the one my husband loved most. The one he named after himself. It still carried his legacy, legally untouched by the convictions because it had been shielded early, cleverly. I waited. When the timing was perfect, I called an emergency board meeting. They expected lawyers, numbers, negotiations. They didn't expect me. I entered slowly. Cane tapping once against marble. The room stood. Old habits die hard. "I'll be brief," I said, sitting at the head of the table. His seat. "This company was built on fraud." Protests erupted. Objections. Threats. I raised one hand. Silence fell. "I own 51%, I continued calmly. "Acquired legally over the past 6 months through intermediaries you never noticed." Faces drained of color. "I am dissolving the brand," I said. "Effective immediately. Assets will be redistributed. Employees retained under a new entity. His name will be removed from every document, every wall, every breath this company takes." One man stood. Furious. "You're erasing history." I looked at him with something close to mercy. "No," I said. "I'm correcting it." When it was done, I walked out without looking back. That night, I slept deeply. Weeks later, my son joined me on the porch at dusk. The air smelled like jasmine. He poured us both tea. My hands weren't shaking anymore, I noticed. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he said quietly. I watched the sky darken. "Forgiveness isn't a transaction." He waited. "I'm not giving you absolution," I continued. "I'm giving you truth. What you do with it will decide the rest of your life." He nodded, eyes wet. I want to learn. I studied him for a long moment. Then I gestured to the chair beside me. Then sit, I said, and listen. He did. From prison my husband finally called. The guard announced it like a warning I accepted. His voice was thin. You've taken everything. I closed my eyes. No, I took back what you stole. A pause. Then, softer, was I ever enough? I considered the question carefully. It deserved that much. You were, I said. Until you decided you needed more than honesty. The line went silent. I never heard from him again. On my birthday a small package arrived, no return address. Inside was a watch, the one my son used to wear. Repaired. Cleaned. I smiled. The city no longer whispered my name. It spoke it plainly now, without scandal attached. Invitations came. Awards. Honors. I declined most. Power, I had learned, is sweetest when you don't need applause. Some evenings I returned to the piano. Other nights, I sat in the dark, listening to the house breathe. It felt different now, lighter. Honest. They once thought I was weak, because I was quiet. They once thought age meant erasure. They once believed the story was over when they wrote me out of the will. They were wrong. I had rewritten the ending while they weren't looking. And I wasn't finished yet. The invitations stopped coming after I declined the last one without explanation. Power circles don't like mysteries they can't own. That was fine. I had spent a lifetime inside rooms where my voice was optional. I preferred the quiet now. The house felt different in those final months. Like it knew something the world didn't yet. Every floorboard remembered my footsteps. Every wall had heard me swallowed whole and still standing. This was not a place of ghosts anymore. It was a place of witnesses. My health began to fail gently, politely. No drama. No alarms. Just a slow reminder that time, unlike men, never negotiates. Doctor spoke in careful phrases. My son listened too closely. I listened just enough. One afternoon, I asked him to bring me a folder from the safe. Black. Unmarked. He hesitated. Is this legal stuff? Yes, I said. And no. He brought it anyway. Inside were documents he had never seen. Trust structures, endowments. Clean, ruthless, precise. I thought you hated wills, he said softly. I hate surprises, I replied. He read silently. His breathing changed as realization set in. The money, where it was going. Who would control it, and who wouldn't. You're not leaving it to me, he said, not accusing. Understanding. I already gave you something more valuable, I said. The truth. Don't insult it by thinking you deserve a fortune for surviving it. He nodded. Tears slid down his face, unhidden now. He didn't wipe them away. Am I forgiven? He asked. I reached for his hand. My grip was still strong. You're no longer lying to yourself, I said. That's the only forgiveness that matters. The next morning, the final article dropped. Not a scandal piece. Not a victory lap. A reckoning. The journalist I'd once invited for tea had waited, patient, like me. She published everything I had allowed her to verify: the fraud, the cover-ups, the erasure of women's labor, my husband's manipulation of history, my son's complicity, and his reckoning. The headline didn't mention revenge. It mentioned truth. Markets dissolved. Names were stripped from scholarships, wings, foundations. My husband's legacy was dismantled line by line, not by anger, but by accuracy. He died in prison 3 weeks later. Heart failure, they said. I felt nothing when I heard. No relief, no grief, just closure. On the day of my final signing, I asked for the same glass-walled office. The lawyer looked surprised, nervous. You don't have to come in, he said gently. Do, I replied. I wore black, not for mourning, but for symmetry. The documents were laid out. My signature waited at the bottom. Outside, Los Angeles moved as it always had, hungry, brilliant, indifferent. My son stood behind me, silent. I signed slowly, steadily. The ink didn't shake. When I finished, I slid the pen forward. That's it, the lawyer said. It's complete. I stood with effort, then turned to my son. They told me once not to expect a dime, I said quietly. Remember that? He nodded. That was the moment they thought I was finished. I continued. But endings only belong to the person who stays conscious. Outside, cameras flashed. They always would. But for the first time they didn't follow me. They followed the story I had already closed. That night, I sat at the piano one last time. My fingers were slow. Imperfect. Honest. I played the piece I used to practice when my son was small, before money, before betrayal, before silence became strategy. The house listened. So did the dark. When the final note faded, I didn't rush to fill the quiet. I let it stay, because silence, true silence, is not absence. It's power that no longer needs to speak. And somewhere in the city, in boardrooms and courtrooms and history books not yet written, my name would surface, not as a victim, not as a villain, but as the woman who waited and won.